They're meant to put people to sleep and wake them back up. They're controlled substances. They're prescriptions. The word is that on overseas trips in particular, that Admiral would go down the aisleway of the airplane and say, all right, who wants to go to sleep?
CNN's also reporting that Dr. Jackson was drunk and banging on the hotel room door of a female employee while on an overseas trip in 2015. And on top of all that, earlier today, his most important patient, President Trump, seemed to suggest that the political swamp he'd have to wade through to get the nomination might not be worth it.
What does he need it for? To be abused by a bunch of politicians that aren't thinking nicely about our country? I really don't think personally he should do it, but it's totally his. I would stand behind him. Totally his decision.
Well, a few hours later, the president met with Jackson in person at the White House shortly after a senior administration official said, quote, Dr. Jackson's record as a White House physician is impeccable. He has improved unit morale, received glowing reviews and promotions under Republican and Democrat presidents. Now, what that official is referring to are glowing performance reviews, not from President Trump, but from President Obama. In 2014, President Obama described him as a most impressive leader. 2 years later, he's poised under pressure with an incredible work ethic. And then he said, quote, Ronnie's positive impact cannot be overstated. He's a tremendous asset to the entire White House team, already at a level of performance and responsibility that far exceeds his current rank. Promote to Rear Admiral now. So what we're seeing is the White House really fighting back against these accusations, including the one that he created a hostile work environment. Our John Roberts got his hands on a 2012 Inspector General report that Jackson himself had ordered. He was going through reportedly a power struggle of sorts with a fellow White House doctor, and the IG report seemed to pin most of the blame on his rival. Quote, Captain Jackson has exhibited poor leadership and is also responsible for the poor climate. But most feel that Captain Jackson's failures were primarily due to the destructive rapport with Captain Coleman, his rival. Well, some of Jackson's supporters say this is all coming out now because his opponents are worried that he may want to privatize the VA, which is something Democratic Congressman Sherrod Brown alluded to just tonight.
The political people in the White House push so hard for privatization, do the Koch brothers bidding. That's what they're all about. To the point that I was going to ask at the hearing, how hard are you going to fight? Are you willing to be fired making that fight for veterans?
So that's obviously something Jackson will have to address at his confirmation hearing. He'll also have to defend himself against all of these accusations, provided that he doesn't withdraw his nomination first. Shannon.
That is the question. More on that coming up. Thank you very much, Kristen. Well, the pressure is on for the Senate to confirm one of President Trump's long-stalled nominees. Tonight, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is moving to put an end to the debate in the Senate on Richard Grenell, Trump's pick for ambassador to Germany. That comes just days ahead of a visit by German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Grenell was nominated last year and has been held up by Democrats despite being advanced by the Foreign Relations Committee twice.
I cannot in good faith support a nominee who has a lengthy track record of tweets attacking both prominent Democratic and prominent Republican women.
Grenell was seen at Mar-a-Lago over the weekend, and the president has made it clear he is growing impatient over this situation. Just yesterday, Mr. Trump tweeting that so-called obstructionists are, quote, maxing out the time on the approval process, despite the next big diplomatic meeting this week with Chancellor Merkel. The president signaling he's open to maybe a new bigger deal on Iran, while urging his Veterans Affairs nominee to fight on. Senior advisor for White House Strategic Communications, Mercedes Schlapp, joins us now. We've got a lot of topics to cover. Thank you for coming in tonight.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Okay, so let's start with Iran and the nuke deal. Obviously, French President Macron here encouraging the president, along with other European allies, to stay engaged in the process. And then we have threats from Iran saying if any parts of the deal are tweaked, we can walk away. The deal essentially collapses, and that means we can fire up this uranium enrichment within days.
Right.
And a lot of people thought, well, that was part of the deal that you're supposed to get rid of those capabilities.
Exactly. Well, I mean, the president hasn't made a final decision on Iran and the JCPOA. He is having an open dialogue with his allies. This is why it was so important for the President Trump to have this meeting with President Macron. Obviously, we have German Chancellor Merkel coming at the end of the week. So these are the discussions that we're having right now. Obviously, for the United States, it is about our national security. It is about ensuring that we do not have a destabilization in terms of Iran, especially especially if they start to continue expanding in terms of their nuclear programs. So this is, of course, an important concern that we have. Obviously, the president, we'll wait to see what the president decides.
Okay, China and Russia saying we will obstruct any attempt by President Trump to sabotage this deal.
Well,
where are they in this?
Let's just remember that it's Iran who has been the bad actor. It's Iran who's been working with Assad over in Syria and creating these the problems that we're seeing in Syria. I mean, what we know is Iran for a long time has been a bad actor. They're spending more time funding terrorist groups like Hezbollah and Hamas rather than funding Iranians in their own land. You're seeing the Iranian economy crumble. I mean, you're seeing the fact that their currency is also tanking. I mean, these are big issues that we're dealing with Iran. The key is that we know whenever Iran touches something, we see disaster coming, whether it's in Iraq, whether it's in Syria. And so we need to make sure that we're holding them accountable.
Well, there are some concerns that I've been reading about folks who are worried about some of the concessions and conversations that are going on with respect to Israel. A piece in the Washington Free Beacon says this: senior Trump administration officials handling the talks are said to have conceded to a demand that Iran only restrict ballistic missile activity to its longer-range missiles, leaving untouched its mammoth arsenal of short-range and medium-range missiles that could easily hit Israel and other Middle Eastern nations. Goes on to quote someone later saying, "I honestly don't know how the president can sell Israel down the river like that." Jewish official who routinely engages with the White House on Iran issues.
Well, first of all, let's remember that President Trump's, his closest ally, one of his closest allies is Israel. I mean, he has a very strong relationship with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Obviously, we're seeing in even a few weeks where you're seeing the opening of the Capitol in Jerusalem. I mean, these are major steps that we've taken because we have such close ties with Israel. Again, we are going to look to see what is in the best interest of the United States in terms of our national security when it comes to Iran. Obviously, we are working closely with Israel as well as our allies, and we'll wait to see what the president decides when it comes to the Iranian nuclear deal.
Okay. Meanwhile, the VA nominee, Admiral Dr. Ronnie Jackson, now in the hot seat tonight over allegations. CBS reporting that there are allegations of drinking on the job, of improperly dispensing medications. He says, "I look forward to having a hearing. It's been rescheduled. I want to answer these questions." In the meantime, there's criticism from both sides of the aisle about how he was or was not vetted. Here's the top Democrat in the Senate, Chuck Schumer.
How did he get through the process with all these allegations not even being made public? My guess, not proper vetting.
I mean, these are false allegations. Let's just start from there. Secondly, you just saw a Democratic Senator Tester coming out and saying basically that in the case of Jackson, that you're looking at a clean FBI vetting. We know for sure that he's not been a target of an IG report. We've seen Democrats and Republicans come out in favor of Ronnie Jackson. In fact, you had President Obama basically saying that Admiral Jackson was poised under pressure, that he should be promoted. I mean, we've seen this time and time again where Dr. Jackson is being dragged through the mud. They should allow this hearing to happen so that Dr. Jackson can speak up. I mean, I just think it's unfortunate that what we're seeing in these confirmation processes are these very qualified, honorable individuals being dragged through the mud. That needs to stop. Let Dr. Jackson have his hearing.
Well, and it sounds like that is what is going to come to be delayed, but it will ultimately happen unless, as the president says, he decides to pull himself out of this process because it is such an unpleasant one for many nominees. We'll stand by to hear more from him because he says he looks forward to taking on these accusations. So, Mercedes Schlapp, great to have you with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in. This is a Fox News alert. We actually have results now in the Arizona special election. This is the latest test of the so-called blue wave, the strength also of the Trump support in key GOP districts. He won this one big. Let's check in with Alicia Acuna. She is live on the ground there from the Grand Canyon State. What can you tell us tonight, Alicia?
Hi, Shannon. Yes, well, we just heard a big cheer go up here at State Senator Debbie Lesko's watch party here. She's the Republican here who has just found out that she has been victorious in this special election race. to fill the seat of disgraced Republican Congressman Trent Franks. He left in December, and it has been a race that actually no one thought was actually going to be a race. This is a Republican stronghold here in the state of Arizona, a very deeply red district that's made up of mostly white, retired Republicans, very conservative, very active voters, and they have come to the call of Debbie Lesko here and Republicans. However, I should tell you, the reason we are here and the reason we are watching is because this is a district in which, since 2012, Democrats haven't even put up a candidate. This time they did. Dr. Haral Teperneni, she's a doctor here in this state, and she's a Democrat who was able to outraise the Republican here. She had attack ads. She had some headliners coming up, Gabby Giffords coming to her assist, and she was able to kind of close in a that Donald Trump won big by 21 points back in 2016. So not a surprise that she has won here. The big question tonight was going to be the spread, whether or not she could pull out a double-digit lead, because anything less could become a message, a wake-up call to Republicans come November. Shannon?
Yeah, and I know that we were thinking we might get these results a little bit later, Alicia, but it seems like a lot of the early balloting may have factored in here as well. And you gave us a little bit of the demographic makeup of what goes on there in that district. It seemed like it was a pretty tough hill to climb for the Democrat. But as you said, this may be more about the spread than about who actually won.
Yes, this is actually about the spread, and we're still getting the results right now. Lesko is leading by 6 points, I believe, at the last check from the Secretary of State's office. They're waiting to see if this is a double-digit lead. I was talking to former Arizona Governor Jan Brewer, and she even agreed that, anything less than a double-digit spread at the end of the day, even though a win is a win, it still could be a wake-up call, because we do have those midterms that we're talking about here. In talking to State Senator Lesko, she said they really want to stop that momentum that they believe Democrats have right now from other special elections that we've seen, Pennsylvania, for example. They really want to put a stop to that here in Arizona and get Democrats' eyes off of this state, especially this district, as we head into the midterms. Shannon?
All right, Alicia Acuna there covering this race all day and tonight on the ground for us. Thank you so much. Sure. Right, we will have much more analysis on this with our very own Chris Stirewell digging into this race, the results, what it means for those fall midterms when we come back. This is a Fox News alert. Republican Debbie Lesko winning the Arizona special election tonight amid fears the blue wave could reach another GOP district. Not tonight, the AP is calling it. And our own Fox News politics editor Chris Stirewell is here with us to break it down. Good to see you, my friend.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so President Trump won this by 21 points.
Right.
There's been some water under the bridge. Things have happened. And a lot of folks in this, what we're seeing right now is about a 6-point spread. But a lot of folks said, yeah, it really needs to be double digits in order for the GOP to breathe any kind of sigh of relief here.
So the magic number for Democrats since 2016 has been 17 points. They have outperformed their partisan baseline in districts and statewide races and in everything else on an average of about 17 points. Now, I don't think that these numbers will, I can't imagine that these numbers will hold.
Yeah.
So the way Arizona works is you get all the early votes, and there's a ton of early vote. These are a lot of older voters. So you get a ton of this early vote, and it comes in, and then you wait. And then at midnight Eastern, they're going to dump the rest of it.
A whole lot more.
So the AP is calling this race on the basis of just the early vote that's in. And it's basically they're saying if the Democrat's not closer than 6 points in this vote, she's not going to be able to make up the difference between here and there. If it were to stay at 6 points, though, it would be a 19-point drop-off from the previous. Now, all that having been said, this was $1 million well spent for Republicans, because if this were a loss or it were even closer than this and it reinforced the momentum from Connor Lamb in Western Pennsylvania, this takes Democrats back to the moral victory space where they say, look at how close this was. This shouldn't have been close at all. She's underperforming by 19 points. And Republicans will say, oh, yeah, well, look at the scoreboard. A win's a win.
Yeah. OK, so Democratic strategist Chad Campbell, talking about this rate, says if you get into being 10 points or below, I think it's panic button time for Republicans at that point. I mean, if you get in single digits in a district like that, then the GOP has a lot to worry about. Again, these are early numbers, so we'll have to wait. But what does this tell you, if anything, right now about the big Senate race in the fall for Flake's going to be open seat?
It needs, look, it will, of course, depend on, they have a rootin' tootin' primary going on out there right now.
I like that phraseology. It's
well,
a way to describe it.
It's Arizona, and they are rootin' and they are a tootin'. If Martha McSally gets through,
Congresswoman, yeah.
She's a congresswoman. Can she do better in a district like this than Kelly Ward, who was a former state legislator? Is it possible that she'll do better there? Who knows? But the narrowness of this margin informs the question about what Democrats are going to need to do in Arizona, and the possibility that we could have a second Senate seat open if John McCain's not able to return to office.
Unfortunately. Okay, so right now you were looking at Governor Jan Brewer. They're live in Arizona, former governor, and Debbie Lesko, who at this point looks to be Congresswoman-elect, based on the AP reporting, and we'll continue to watch those numbers. Now, a win there for the GOP tonight.
Yeah.
Just now watch for the margin. So let's talk about West Virginia, because
I always want to
speaking
talk
of
about West
rooting and
Virginia.
tooting,
Yes, of course, right so.
So let's talk about what's going on there. And now these top 3 folks that have come out of the most recent polling.
Yeah, we have a poll, because you know why we have a poll?
Because we got a debate.
Because we got a debate. We got a week from tonight, we're going to have a debate in Morgantown, West Virginia, and we invited everybody who was over 10% in our poll. This is one of the hottest Senate primaries in the country, in one of the most important Senate races. This counts as one of the big 4 for Republicans: Indiana, North Dakota, Missouri, and West Virginia, for what they believe are their best chances to not only preserve their Senate majority, but maybe grow it a little bit. We've got a poll. It's a 3-man race. You've got Congressman Evan Jenkins. You've got the state's Attorney General Patrick Morrisey. And then you've got the wild card in this race, businessman Don Blankenship, who is the only candidate in the race who is fighting a federal criminal conviction concurrent with, and it was for a mine disaster, concurrent with campaigning. So this has been a wild race, and West Virginia politics never disappoints.
No, it doesn't, and you should know.
I should know.
You are Mr. West Virginia. All years, like there's not just a year assigned to you, like 2010 or whatever. Just
right, Mr. West Virginia. Yes, that's right.
Now these are the top issues. I thought these were important too and interesting that came out of our polling for West Virginia voters, especially those who are interested in the primary. The opioid crisis, which we know has hit that state very hard. That's number 1, close behind the economy, followed by immigration and healthcare. How do you think these things factor into the conversation and the decisions that primary and general election voters are going to make there?
The opioid crisis at the top of that list is reflected in these guys are there's a guy who didn't make the debate stage for us. He's running in the low single digits in other polls, but he was proposing waterboarding people who are caught selling opioids. So it is pushing them to the extreme. My most interesting nugget in that poll, though, Joe Manchin in the 30s for approval among Republicans in West Virginia. So that tells us something, that Joe Manchin, no matter what, is going to be a tough, whoever comes out of this, Joe Manchin is going to be a tough out if almost a third of Republicans think that he's an okay guy.
Yeah, I remember being there and covering his Senate race the last time around, and people across the aisle, across the state, I mean, they love Joe Manchin. So,
well, he shot the cap and trade bill with a deer rifle.
I saw
that.
it.
Exactly.
I saw the ad. All right, Chris, great to have you with us on a late breaking news night tonight.
You bet.
I'll see you soon. All right, again, Brett Baer and Martha McCallum are going to moderate this. The West Virginia GOP Senate debate, May 1st, 1 week from today, 6:30 p.m. Eastern. Don't want to miss that. But in the meantime, do not forget Brett's interview with former FBI Director James Comey this Thursday. Well, the caravan has reached the southern border. What happens next? Trace Gallagher is here tracking all the details. And the Bible, no question, it is one of the best, if not the best-selling book of all time. But one popular magazine says it's overrated. Stick around for the Real News Roundup. This is a Fox News alert. Immigrants traveling to the U.S. as part of a caravan through Mexico continue to arrive at the southern border tonight as the Trump administration warns they will be turned away. Tonight, Trace Gallagher tracks the path of the caravan and whether the president's push to deny them entry is working. Good evening, Trace.
Good evening, Shannon. After about a month or so of traveling in that well-publicized caravan, there reportedly are now about 130 women and children in Mexicali. That's about 90 miles east of San Diego on the Mexico side of the border. Other Central American immigrants are said to be making their way to the border by train and could be in Mexicali by tomorrow. Over the past few weeks, the caravan largely broke up and the media focus mostly went away, but the administration is still watching. President Trump set the tone, tweeting, quote, "Despite the Democrat-inspired laws on sanctuary cities and the border being so bad and one-sided, I have instructed the Secretary of Homeland Security not to let these large caravans of people into our country. It is a disgrace. We are the only country in the world so naive. Wall. DHS Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen followed up saying members of the caravan who enter the U.S. illegally will be referred for prosecution. Nielsen goes on to note that the law is different when it comes to asylum seekers, quoting again, "For those seeking asylum, all individuals may be detained while their claims are adjudicated efficiently and expeditiously, and those found not to have a claim will be promptly removed from the United States." And being sent back across the border likely means going back to Central America. Mexico has made it very clear that it would like to see its own immigration laws obeyed, and Attorney General Jeff Sessions echoed that, saying, quote, "Promoting and enforcing the rule of law is essential to protecting a nation, its borders, and its citizens." Amnesty International says the U.S. is trying to tarnish asylum seekers as criminals, but that seeking asylum is not a crime. And the Center for Immigration Studies says we can expect a steady stream of immigrants to come in the weeks ahead. Watch.
I am sure that there will be hundreds of people who may have been with this caravan at some point in time who are making their way in smaller groups to the border because they still believe that they will be allowed into the country.
And of course, security along the border is now a bit tighter, with National Guard troops being deployed to support the Border Patrol. Shannon.
All right, Trace Gallagher live for us in LA. Thank you. Time now for your Real News Roundup. The New York Times issuing a major correction tonight after a report that cited Palestinian payments to the families of terrorists as a prime example of far-right conspiracy theories on Facebook. Well, here's the correction, quote, "In fact, Palestinian officials have acknowledged providing payments to the families of Palestinians killed while carrying out attacks on Israelis or convicted of terrorist attacks and imprisoned in Israel. That is not a conspiracy theory." Meanwhile, the editors of GQ magazine naming the Holy Bible as one of the most overrated books in history. The Good Book is ranked number 12 on the magazine's list of 21 books you don't have to read before you die. Among the other books on the list are Huckleberry Finn, Lonesome Dove, and The Catcher in the Rye. And Miguel Diaz-Canel becoming Cuba's president after Raul Castro stepped down, but the U.S. media is coming under scrutiny for how it reported the process. The Associated Press, for example, tweeting that Diaz-Canel was elected Cuba's new leader. Online critics point out he was not elected. He was selected to be the Castro's hand-picked successor in that communist stronghold. Well, rarely does 2/3 of the Senate agree on anything except for this. An American pastor on trial in Turkey, two governments vowing to battle it out over his fate. Senators James Lankford and Jeanne Shaheen teaming up in a bipartisan move to put the heat on Turkey. They join us live next. Now, in a story we've been following, American pastor Andrew Brunson, who's on trial in Turkey facing charges that he's linked to a group accused of orchestrating a failed 2016 military coup. Brunson getting support from President Trump, who's called for his release, and Sam Brownback, the newly appointed ambassador at large for international religious freedom, who traveled to Turkey last week to plead his case.
Administration is deeply concerned about this case. We completely believe factually he is innocent. Andrew Brunson is innocent.
Now, two lawmakers from across the aisle are teaming up to call on the Trump administration to take a tougher stance against Turkey and to impose sanctions. Jeanne Shaheen is a Democratic senator from New Hampshire, and James Lankford is a Republican senator from Oklahoma. Both of them sit together on key Senate panel that handles foreign appropriations. Great to have both of you in tonight.
Thank you.
This is a story our viewers are familiar with. We have been following this. You all have sent out a statement in this call for sanctions now saying this: Turkish officials who participate in the detainment of any innocent American citizen should face international consequences, and the actions against Pastor Brunson in particular qualify as hostage taking. Senator Shaheen, those are tough words.
Well, they are, but that accurately reflects what's going on in Turkey. Pastor Brunson is being held hostage, and I think it goes right all the way to the top to Erdogan, President Erdogan. He's the one responsible, and these are totally made-up charges. They don't even connect Pastor Brunson with his church. They've called him a Mormon and don't seem to know who he represents. This is someone who's been in Turkey for 23 years, who at his trial when he was asked about the charges, said, "I love Turkey. I would never do anything against the Turkish people." So this is not fair, and we need to make sure that there's some heat brought on Turkey for what they're doing.
And so this is obviously a bipartisan effort. I know 66 senators have signed on to another letter that's been sent to President Erdogan, specifically calling for Brunson's release. Tell me about the sanctions package that you all are putting together.
So we're actually putting sanctions directly on those individuals. So this would be the judges, this would be the city officials. This is targeting those individuals that are actually doing the hostage taking and actually facilitating him being held. This is a NATO ally. This is Turkey. This is who has been an ally with the United States for a very long time. We've had a great partnership with fighting against terrorism. But in the last 3 years, Turkey has made a really dramatic shift from who they have been in our partnership, and they seem to be shifting away from both Western values and ideas and rule of law and all those things that have bound us together to be able to become something we really don't recognize. So we'd love to be able to restore this relationship with Turkey, but we didn't move. They have moved, and we'd like to be able to figure out how to be able to patch us back together again. But you can't just take an American randomly hostage and to be able to hold them and say, I'm going to try to get something from them. Quite frankly, I would not, as an American business person right now, ever extend business into Turkey, and I'd be very attentive if you own a business to doing business in Turkey or traveling in Turkey right now, because we have an American that's been held there for a year and a half without charges for most of that time period, and now the charges just that are invented now. So people need to be cautious trying to travel to Turkey right now. It's a very different day.
Well, and it sounds like that President Erdogan is trying to make a deal or make a trade. He's referencing this exiled cleric that is here in Pennsylvania, saying he's attached to the 2016 coup. Now, this cleric has lived in the U.S. since 1999. He's denied all the connections. So here's what President Erdogan has to say about this. He says the U.S. is behind Gulen, this exiled cleric. If you want Brunson, look at the steps you have taken in the past. Why don't you deport this man in accordance with the extradition treaty? Senator Sheen, it sounds like he wants to make a deal.
Well, that's what he's talking about. But the fact is, we do have an extradition treaty with Turkey, but they have to present evidence. And so far, they haven't presented any evidence that shows that the cleric, Mr. Gulen, has direct ties to the coup that happened in Turkey. There are a number of his followers who have been put in jail and who may have ties to that coup attempt, but there's no ties with Pastor Brunson. And one of the things we don't do with anybody is hold hostage people who are innocent and say we expect a trade for us holding this innocent person. So this is definitely not what our allies should do. And this is Turkey, where they did have they have had a democratic country in the past. They have had rule of law, but it's very clear that that's beginning to change now.
Well, I know that Senator Tillis was one of the key movers on here. Brunson was a constituent of his, and he has gone there. He said he thought it was important for him to see in person that there are U.S. senators who are working on this case, to see him face to face, to say no one is forgetting about you. You both have mentioned, you know, Turkey is an ally. They're a NATO ally. So how do we mend this relationship now?
Well, there has to be some clear steps that Turkey's going to have to take. And clearly, one of those steps needs to be to release an American that you're just holding to try to use as leverage for who knows what. We have to be able to work out our relationships with how we're dealing with terrorism. Turkey has a very unique position in the world, where they have Syria and they have Iraq and they're bordered by Iran. They have a lot of threats that are around them, both with Kurdish terrorists that are there. Some of those same Kurds we're working with to be able to clear ISIS. Some of those same Kurds they're afraid are also being able to come and attack them as well. So I understand some of the dynamics that Turkey has. But Turkey can't just start imprisoning people. They have tens of thousands of people with no charges they've just locked up. Journalists, educators, judges, all these individuals they've just locked up and they're just going to hold. They continue to extend their emergency powers. They're shifting away from being a place where they have rule of law. So we want to be able to work out differences that we may have an opinion on issues, but we'd love to be able to see Turkey acting like Turkey again, quite frankly, who they were 3, 4, 5 years ago.
To this sanctions package, how hopeful are both of you that it will make it through the legislative process and ultimately be signed into law?
Well, we're just at the start of that process, but as we saw from the letter, we had 66 senators sign on, a very strong bipartisan showing. We think it's very important to send a strong message to Turkey about what our concerns are with respect to what they're doing. And as James said, this is a NATO ally. We're supposed to be working together on threats against our countries, and we need to let them know that their behavior is not acceptable.
Well, and when there is an American in peril overseas, it is great to see bipartisan action on this. Please keep us updated as this proceeds.
Yeah, continue to pray for Dr. Brunson and his family. These are difficult days for them. We have not forgotten, though, and we'll continue to be able to work to get him out.
And we will continue to cover the story. Thank you both for coming in tonight.
Thank you.
Great to have you. Well, the Trump administration's travel ban heads to the Supreme Court in just a few hours. We are going to preview the pivotal case. Will politics or principle prevail? Stick around. And truckers to the rescue. How a fleet of tractor trailers helped police trying to prevent a man from taking his own life. Weigh in on President Trump and his words, and in many cases tweets, against the text of his travel ban 3.0. Both sides see this as a constitutional showdown.
This is a very difficult issue for the court because it really gets to core issues of the executive's authority under the Constitution and under federal law to decide who can be let into this country and who couldn't. In many ways, it's a political judgment, and historically, the court has been very reluctant to tread into areas where it could be viewed as making a political judgment that's properly confined to the executive.
This ban does not make us safer, and in fact, it actually goes against our national security because it undermines key elements of our Constitution. The idea that we don't discriminate on the basis of religion. There cannot be a religious test at the border. That is un-American.
All right, let's talk about it with syndicated radio host and Fox News contributor Richard Fowler. And Guy Benson, also Fox News contributor and host of the brand new show Benson and Harf, debuting May 7th on Fox News Radio. We like to get the little plug in there.
Gotta get the plug in.
Thank you.
Good to see both of you tonight. All right. So in a matter of hours, they have this argument. This is travel ban 3.0 because we had a couple different versions. They hammered it out. Guy, they feel like they got it right with this one. The administration does, because they say, listen, we have very specific reasons for each country that is mentioned. There are exceptions. We've modified from the objections to the first two. Do you think this one survives?
Travel ban 1.0 was rolled out poorly and sloppily, and there was a reason that it got thrown out. But 3.0, as you say, has been much more carefully thought through and implemented, and it is not in any way, shape, or form anymore a Muslim ban, despite what some of the critics say, because some of the countries on the list include Venezuela, include North Korea, which are very obviously not majority Muslim countries. So based on my understanding, and I've read this, I'm not an attorney, but I've read a fair amount of analysis about this, the president has pretty broad authority under federal statute to make these decisions about classes of non-Americans coming into or out of the United States. Because some of the previous objections have been dealt with, to me, on its face, even if you disagree with the policy, it is constitutional and it should be upheld as such.
Okay, so this has been the problem with a lot of the lower courts that have ruled in. Even if some will say, if you just looked at it on the face, what the words are written, it does seem to be facially neutral at this point. But many of the lower court judges, Richard, as you know, have gone through what the president said during the campaign, tweets, campaign rallies, things that he said about Muslim people coming to this country, about how he's going to have extreme vetting, those kinds of things. And those judges have said, you know what, we're going to take that into the record. Even though it's not part of formally the record, it's because of these statements he's made. One law professor says this: if Trump did not have Twitter, this would be a 9-0 case, meaning in his favor. But tomorrow, we'll have to watch and see now if the justices decide all of those comments outside of the text of this thing count.
I think that's absolutely right. I think the key word here is, and I'm not a lawyer either, but the key word here is intent, right? What was the president's intent by creating this law? So you have two sides of this. I think you have the side, the argument that Guy is making, that the courts actually worked. Every time that like 1.0 and 2.0 was defeated, the Trump administration went back and they fixed it so it was more quote unquote legal, right? But then you have this larger this prevailing argument of, but what was the president and the Trump administration's intent by creating this initial ban? And was this a ban created to ban certain people from certain countries because of who they choose to worship? And that is the argument that you're going to hear the folks from Hawaii make, saying that President Trump has created this ban because he wants to ban individuals from Muslim countries coming into the United States.
There are much bigger Muslim countries
like
and
Indonesia.
other populations that aren't included.
Absolutely.
And that's going to be part of the
Indonesia
argument.
is the most populous majority Muslim country in the world that's unaffected. And as I mentioned before, there are several non-Muslim countries now affected by this. So to me, I understand the point you're making about original intent, but the law and the policy has changed. And the question now before the court is the current policy constitutional or not? And I think very clearly on its face, it is.
Well, and I think back to just a few years ago when Arizona had written its own state laws, SB 1070, dealing with immigration, and they were smacked down by the justices who most of them said, this is not an issue for states. This is for the federal branch or for the federal or the executive branch to make decisions about.
Well, I think that's it. And I think there's a larger, bigger question here. And the Supreme Court won't decide it tomorrow, but I think it's something the American people should know, is that we have what we call the imperial executive. This gives the executive branch the ability to create these laws and I believe truly that this is a law that should have been created by the Congress because they are the representative of the people. And the fact that the president can have a sweeping executive order and determine what we do to immigration law is problematic. And thus we've got to, fix that.
Unless you got 3 seconds.
I agree with you on Congress, but they gave him this authority.
And they shouldn't have. They should take it back immediately.
That's a separate question.
Okay, so we get to some agreement and some disagreement. Gentlemen, good to see you both. We'll see you both on the radio as well. All right, our hero tonight is the 4-legged variety, a deaf and blind dog responsible for saving a life. You don't want to miss it. It's next. Before we go, a tribute to some quick-thinking Detroit police. On an interstate near Detroit, police recruited 13 tractor-trailer operators to park under an overpass where a pedestrian was threatening to jump and commit suicide. If he jumped, the hope would be that the trucks would have shortened the fall. Police did convince the man to give up and seek medical help. And tonight's hero, meet Max, a 17-year-old dog who spent 15 hours in the rugged, rainy Australian bushland with a lost 3-year-old girl named Aurora. That little girl had wandered off and her family could not find her. Well, the dog cuddled up to Aurora, kept her calm and warm, and then went and got rescuers and led them back to the girl. Local police have named Max an honorary police dog. All right, I'll see you tomorrow morning live from the Supreme Court as the justices hear arguments over the president's travel ban 3.0. For now, most watched, most trusted, most grateful you spent the evening with us. Good night from Washington. I'm Shannon Bream.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. President Trump is hosting the French President Emmanuel Macron at a state dinner at this very moment in Washington. We'll take you there live in a moment for the toasts. But first, a wave of shootings in this country has revealed something about America, and it's not, by the way, that we need more gun control. Instead, it has revealed that the public cannot rely on its government to keep them safe. We've learned that conclusively. The failures of the Broward County Police during the Parkland, Florida shooting are well known, but last weekend's shooting at a Tennessee Waffle House also exposed a wave of government miscues. Trace Gallagher has more details on that tonight. Hey, Trace.
Hi, Tucker. During the high school massacre in Parkland, Florida, Broward County Sheriff's deputies reportedly took cover behind cars and trees, even though one deputy knew where the shooter was. Coral Springs police now say they saw deputies taking shelter while they rushed past them to get inside the school. This report is on top of that surveillance video and dispatch audio that shows Broward County School Resource Deputy Scott Peterson also not entering the school building despite seeing the shooter in the stairwell. Broward County Sheriff Scott Israel said at the time that he was sick to his stomach that Peterson didn't go inside. But now the rank and file of the Broward Sheriff's Office are taking a no confidence vote on Sheriff Israel. And a big component of the vote is that Sheriff placed the blame on Deputy Peterson instead of waiting for the investigation to be finalized. Sheriff Israel calls the vote a union ploy to get a pay raise. Meantime, prior to the Nashville Waffle House shooting, police had numerous contacts with suspect Travis Reinking, including days before the attack when Reinking allegedly stole a car and police gave chase, but then called off the pursuit to track the car using GPS. In 2016 and 17, Reinking told police in Illinois and Colorado that music star Taylor Swift was stalking him. He was later arrested by Secret Service for violating White House security. And when the FBI learned that Reinking owned 4 weapons, including an AR-15 rifle, they had Illinois police revoke his gun card and turn the weapons over to his father. The dad gave the guns back and could now face charges. And finally, 7 months, we should note, after the Vegas shooting, some 700+ hours of video and 2,000 911 calls remain largely unseen and unheard. Tucker.
Trace Gallagher with details. Thanks a lot, Trace, as always. Well, you remember Broward County Sheriff Scott Israel. He thoroughly discredited himself with his handling of the Parkland shooting, where at a CNN gun control rally, he attempted to vilify gun owners as a group while simultaneously heaping credit on himself like a megalomaniac. Now, Sheriff Israel is facing a vote of no confidence from his own deputies. Jeff Bell is a deputy sheriff and president of the Broward Sheriff's Office Deputies Association, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Bell, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So, facing a vote of no confidence for what? Why do you have no confidence?
Well, there's a series of events that have led up to this vote of no confidence, and it has nothing to do with the contract whatsoever. That is a blatant lie by the sheriff himself. But this is about a series of events over the past couple of years, such as bad policies of the Promise program and the civil citation program that takes all discretion away from deputies to make the arrests that we need to make. It's about the lack of training facilities, not having our own gun range to properly train for these situations. It's about the distrust between the sheriff's office and the union when the sheriff's office asked for our help to raise property taxes on citizens because they claim to be broke, but yet only to find out after completing an audit that the sheriff's office returned $100 million back to the county commission alone last year. And then it's the discovery of the misuse of taxpayer money by the Broward Sheriff's Office by providing private entities such as Napa Auto Parts with free gas cards from the Sheriff's Office, where we've identified through public records requests that in 1 year alone, they obtained 6,000 gallons of gasoline from our gas pumps. That is a fleecing of Broward County. And then also on top of it, the disparity of treatment and punishment between the command staff if they were to commit felonies and untruthfulness compared to a deputy is a far great time span of what punishment we will get between the rank and file and the command staff.
So
that
what
has led to this no confidence.
Well, that's quite a litany. I mean, what you're describing is a combination of incompetence and corruption. Call me cynical, but when you watched Sheriff Israel lay the entire blame for the shooting on Middle America, because ordinary law-abiding people have too many guns in his view, did it seem like an effort to distract from his own failures?
Absolutely it was, and you can see this pattern of this. There's Sheriff Israel back in his own Facebook post from February 24th of